That child was very intelligent and handsome. There was a huge difference between my age and his. He was quite prominent in the class. That was the reason why he was like the other teachers in my eyes. One of the principles of my teaching is that I treat all children equally and treat everyone equally. I never give preference to anyone over other children because of their intelligence. I always tried to avoid this. I ignored the child's words, saying that he was a child who did not need to take anything seriously, but I definitely enjoyed his childish talk. I came out of school during the break. Mirarak was now heading home so that I could quickly reach home and rest. In a short time, I reached home, freshened up, ate food and then lay down to rest. I had just closed my eyes when the door of the room opened and someone entered. At the sound of a knock, I opened my eyes and saw that it was my mother who was coming. I sat up straight and she came and sat in front of me. "How are you? You were resting?" I asked and she smiled. "Yes, but I had to talk to you about something important, that's why I came." My mother said. I looked at her in surprise. What was the important thing that she left her rest to do with me? "Yes, how? What is it that you want to do?" I showed surprise. She smiled once again and held my hands gently. "Yes, it's a very important thing and I wanted to talk to you right now because your father wanted an answer at night." This time my mother told me. I looked at my mother even more confused. "Actually, now you are of marriageable age, so your father wants to get you married. For this purpose, he has also seen a relationship. The boy is good and educated. There are people who eat and drink and do not lack anything. Your father likes everything, so knowing your consent, he met these people. And I want to call you home to see you." When my mother told me the whole story, the child whose name was Hamid and who had told me today that I would marry him and I would be his bride, and then the father who was lying in the middle while now my marriage was being discussed. Where did he go? I was shocked by my mother's question and came to my senses and said, "No, nothing. I was thinking about something else. Do as you see fit." Like a good Oriental girl, I left every decision to my parents because I had no objection in the middle. After listening to me, they were very happy and prayed for me to be happy forever and instructed me to rest and left the room. After they left, I started thinking about their words but then shook my head and started to rest. I am the youngest daughter of my parents and I am only 22 years old. I have 2 older brothers and both are married and fathers of children. My brothers, sisters and children live with us, which makes the whole house very lively. I do not have any other sisters, which is why I am the only daughter and sister, and I am very fond of my parents and brothers. I am also very friendly with my sisters-in-law, which makes the atmosphere in our house very happy. I have done my MA and after doing my MA, I started teaching as a hobby because I was very keen to become a teacher since childhood. I was not forced to do the job, but I was doing it just for the sake of my hobby. My father has his own ready-made garment factory from Wera. We earn more than we thought in a month and the work of my father's factory is increasing day by day, which also increases the profit. My brother and father manage this factory and thus our life is passing very happily and contentedly. I had been working in this school for 3 months. My father did not like to exhaust himself by doing Mir Ajib, but he gave in to my wish. He wanted me not to have to work hard because he was worried about me and he said so out of love for me. For the last 3 months I had taught period-wise in the school, but 2 days ago I was given 6 classes that now I would have to teach them only, and I also took this responsibility without any objection that I only meant teaching and not changing the class. Now I was a teacher of 6th class and used to teach them only, but today that kid Hamid came to me and talked about marriage with me in a very strong manner, which I had laughed off, saying that he was a child and children often do such things. After conveying my consent to my father, my mother also told me that those people would come to see me for a few days, which I was left silently nodding my head. Today again, I was teaching 6th graders in school when suddenly the same child Hamid came to me and said, "Teacher, I will marry you and you will be my bride." I was a little surprised to hear the same thing from him again, but then I laughed uncontrollably and avoided his words, saying that he is a child and what can I do to this child on this meaningless matter except laugh at his words. I had avoided his words again today, and after telling me this, he went back to his place. This thought also crossed my mind while I was busy with the other children, but in the next few days, I realized how determined that child was because he used to come to me every day and say the same thing, that I will marry you and you will be my bride. At first I would laugh or joke around and avoid what he said, but for how long? My patience was running out and I felt like I would get angry at him any day and take it out on him. I didn't understand why he was saying this to me, and that too without any reason. I tried to stop him from saying this by scolding him, but he didn't stop and I was very fed up with him. I couldn't see any solution to this problem. How could I stop this child from saying this? I didn't tell any of my fellow teachers because I knew that after hearing me, they would say that he is a child and is ignorant, so ignore his words as a child, but that was the whole point. I couldn't ignore his words and I was also very fed up with his same thing every day. That day too, I was sitting on a chair checking my 6th class copy when he came to me and then repeated the same thing he used to say every day, and today my self-control was shattered and I was extremely angry when he stood in front of me with an innocent face. "Bring your mother to school tomorrow," I said angrily. I wanted to call his mother so that I could talk to her and tell her about her child's behavior so that she would stop him. He was not listening to me, but he would have listened to his mother. "My mother cannot come to school," this child confidently told the first one. "Why can't she come?" I was very angry at his refusal, but I controlled my anger and asked him gently. "She cannot come to school because she is disabled. You come home and meet her." When this child said this, I was suddenly surprised that this child's mother was disabled. I couldn't believe it, but I was in class 6 and not so young that he would have lied so easily. Of course, his mother was disabled, that's why he was saying that. After hearing him, I shook my head because I had decided to go to his house and meet his mother, and now I was going to go to his house after school. The rest of the time, I ignored Hamid's words and was busy with work. After the break, I picked up my bag and left the school with a file of my necessary papers in my hand. That child Hamid was with me because along with me, this child remembered that I was going to his house to meet his disabled mother. We walked for a long time through the streets and alleys, and in about 5 minutes we reached his house, which was not very big, but a small old house. I entered the house with the child. A strange desolation and horror was dripping from the walls of the house, which made me a little worried, but then I gathered courage and started looking for Hamid's mother, who I had not seen anywhere. Even after looking from one room to another and then into the veranda and the kitchen, in other words, throughout the house, I still could not see Hamid's mother, who, according to Hamid, was standing on one side and silently watching me. I was about to ask Hamid in a state of worry where his mother was when suddenly the child said, "Mother is in this room." I looked at the room in front of me at his direction, but as soon as I looked at this room, I was surprised because I had already looked in this room. It was empty, just some old and worn out furniture was kept there. But after looking once, I entered the room again at Hamid's request, thinking there was no harm in looking again. As soon as I stepped inside, the ground gave way from under my feet because a harsh and masculine voice emerged from behind me. I lost consciousness and quickly turned around and looked back, and I screamed in fear because right in front of me was a tall, slender Samarda staring at me with his evil eyes. Who are you?" I asked angrily. The door was open but Hamid was nowhere to be found and there was a man standing in front of the door who I couldn't get out of. I didn't know who he was but I was feeling immense fear of him. I was now regretting why I had listened to Hamid and why I had come here with him. "I am Hamid's father and now you will be married to Hamid." When Hamid's father said this, my eyes widened in surprise. "What nonsense are you talking about?" I shouted in shock, to which the man looked at me with disgust. "Speak in a low voice." The man growled angrily. "You speak in a low voice and let's get married now. How could it be like this? He is 12 years old and I am 22 years old. Anyway, I am going to get married. If you are so keen on your son's marriage, then get him married to a girl of his age." I said this in an angry tone and quickly moved outside, but I had not even stepped out of the door when suddenly this man put his hand on my mouth. He probably had a handkerchief in his hand, from which a strange stench reached my nose and my brain, and in the next moment I lost consciousness and fell down. It all happened so suddenly that I did not even get a chance to think or understand anything. I did not know how long I remained unconscious, but when I regained consciousness, Mir Asr was in so much pain and discomfort as if someone had put a boil in my head. My eyes were also getting extremely heavy. I tried to reduce my pain by pressing my eyes and temples, and when I calmed down a little, the scene before I fainted flashed before my eyes. The memory of this scene sent shivers down my spine. I looked around in fear, and my fear increased when I saw that I was in a deserted and decayed room where scrap wood was kept and a foul smell was coming from there. This was not the room in the house where Hamid had taken me, but it was some other place. I was now regretting why I had listened to Hamid. Why had I gone to his house? If I had known that something like this could happen to me by going to his house, I would never have gone there, but the whole point was that I did not know anything. I wanted to check the phone, but Mir Abig was with me, but the phone was not there, meaning that the man had also taken Mir Afan. I quickly moved towards the door and started knocking loudly and asking to open it, but there was no response, which made me even more nervous. I did not know how worried my family would be. Would they find me missing and find me or not? Maybe that person would kill me, but it was certain that I would never listen to him. How could I marry Hamid, who was only 12 years old? I did not know whether it was day or night outside. How long had passed like this? Sometimes I would sleep and sometimes I would get up and sit up because I was feeling extremely hungry, but the man who was Hamid's father had brought me here and imprisoned me and left me and did not even come back to check on me. In this struggle and anxiety, I fell asleep and again my eyes opened to the sound of a knock. When I opened my eyes, the same person was entering in front of me. He had a shopper in his hand which he had given me and said, "Take this food and eat it." I was very hungry, so I silently grabbed the shopper. "Why are you doing all this?" I said in a low voice that I did not have the strength to argue anymore. "Because your father had promised me that he would get you married to my son, but after making the promise, he forgot, and when I reminded him, he was also cunning. I will not let him go so easily, that is why I called you home by deception so that I could get you and my son married. Now, take this paper and sign it," he said in a bitter tone, holding the paper and chain towards me, so I held the paper and opened it, not understanding what he was saying, and my mind was blown. They were marriage papers on which a small thumb was attached, which probably did not belong to Hamid. No one gets married without the consent of the heart, and I am also not willing, so you cannot force me to get married, and I have full faith in my father. He also cannot promise anyone to marry my child who is 12 years younger than me," I said bitterly, and he started looking at me angrily. "Your father may not have told you, but it is true that your father had promised me that he would get you married to my son, and..." He was just talking when his phone rang, and then he picked up the phone and talked for a while and then turned to me. "I will come back tomorrow and I want your signature on these papers at all costs, otherwise it will not be good." He threatened me and left, to which I started eating my food with tears in my eyes, crying helplessly. That night also passed in the same restlessness. He had given me only one meal, probably so that I would obey him and sign the marriage papers. I had full faith in my father that he could never do that. The next day I was sitting in fear when the door opened and someone entered, but my surprise was endless when I saw that it was a disabled woman. My first thought was that she might not be Hamid's mother, and she confirmed my statement without me asking, telling me that she was Hamid's mother and that the person who had kept me here was Hamid's father. She was a woman of about 40 years old, while her husband was also 40 to 45 years old. I tried to ask this woman something, but she told me to be quiet and then, without answering any of my questions, motioned for me to follow her. I quickly started following her wheelchair, which she was driving herself. After coming out of this house, she walked through several streets and brought me to another house after a minute. This house was very clean and had 2 floors. The house was very nice not only from the outside but also from the inside. She brought me to a room and closed the door. She motioned for me to freshen up, so I washed my hands and face, came back refreshed and sat in front of her. "I apologize for any pain you had to face because of my husband and son. If possible, forgive my husband and son." The woman folded her hands and said. I quickly shook my head in the negative, opened her hands and asked, was what her husband said about my marriage with Hamid a lie? On my question, she nodded in the affirmative, which made me blush. But this is not the whole truth. When this woman said this, I looked at her confusedly. If this was not the whole truth, then was it the whole truth? This question must have also crossed my mind. Then this woman said, I will tell you the whole truth. After hearing this, I turned my attention to her. Mir had the right to know about the half-truth due to which I had been suffering for the past several hours. Then she started talking that I was married to my husband Basham. Your father and my husband had a very close friendship, despite the fact that there was a difference of 6 to 7 years in their ages. When my first son, Ahmed, was born to me, your father already had 2 sons. You were born later, when Mir Abida was 2 years old. Hashim thought of turning his friendship with your father into a relationship, and in this regard he talked to your father, who promised that he would marry you to my son.